Hi everyone, I'm Nurs from FunnelFox, and today we're gonna host a webinar on topic of why payments fail and how to recover them. Um, let's wait for maybe a couple of minutes until we have a couple of more attendees. And meanwhile, we have David from FastSpring here.
Hey, Nurs, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. Okay, maybe just one more people. All right, got it. Yeah, again, welcome everyone. I'm Nurs from FunnelFox. I'm a customer solution lead. We handle a lot of payments and the billing side on FunnelFox here, and we help, as FunnelFox, we help mobile apps scale their web funnels. We provide orchestration, we provide payment solutions, and then again with me is David. He's a CMO from FastSpring. David, if you could give some intro about you and intro about FastSpring here.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So FastSpring is a payment provider. We specialize in being what's called a merchant of record. This basically means you offload the harder parts of payments to a company like FastSpring. So we do a lot of the payment orchestration, allow access to typical payment methods like credit cards, but also local payment methods, alternative payment methods. And that's all encapsulated in a service that provides you 100% tax compliance for sales tax and VAT worldwide in the regions that we serve. So that's a little bit about FastSpring. I'm the CMO there at FastSpring. I've been building and optimizing e-commerce funnels for over 25 years. Owned and operated a mobile app agency where we built and monetized mobile apps for ourselves and clients. And that's a little bit about my background, Nurs.
Yeah, thank you for the intro. Huge experience here. People feel free to join. Maybe connect with David on LinkedIn if you have any questions about FastSpring, or me about the FunnelFox. Yeah, today. Yeah, let's start with the topic. So, Web2App converts two times better than in-app. Sometimes it gives you more higher LTV, but one of the biggest drop-offs happens on the payment page, and not a lot of teams pay attention to that. So this is what we're gonna discuss it. Um, so when we talk about failed payments, the core metric we track is the acceptance rate, which is a percentage of attempts that succeed, like payment attempts. So again, some teams, they don't track it, or if they do, they don't track it based on geo. They don't track it based on maybe the payment type, whether it's a card, whether it's Apple Pay. So let's break it down a little bit. So David, what is the healthy acceptance rate like across FastSpring, and what would be the red flag in your opinion?
Yeah, you really right to note the different variables that you mentioned in terms of driving the acceptance rate. And the answer is really just it depends. Depends on your product, the type of customers you have, and what regions you're marketing your app in. If you're looking at credit card transactions in the US for a relatively stable customer base, so say you had like a B2B app, it wouldn't be uncommon to see 95 to 97% acceptance rates. If you have a different type of app that might be more prone to fraudsters trying to take advantage of your app for whatever reason, you might have a much lower acceptance rate, even in stable markets like North America, US, and Canada, Western Europe, that kind of thing. And then, of course, when you look in individual countries, you can also have different acceptance rates across different payment methods. So what's
Mhm.
the red flag? It's generally an acceptance rate that's lower than your peers in a similar market. And it's going to change depending on the region and the payment method. And again, your type of product. So B2B tends to have much higher acceptance rates than B2C in general. And certainly certain types of B2C can have much lower acceptance rates depending on your pricing and packaging and other variables. So I wish there was like a really like perfect canary in the coal mine metric to say like, oh my goodness, something's wrong. But it really just depends a little bit on where you're monetizing, how you're monetizing, the app itself, What I recommend here is to go to your payment provider. So again, I mentioned FastSpring. We're a merchant of record. There's other providers like us, like Paddle and 2Checkout. And then there's payment service providers, and they all provide like different levels of support, but they should be able to give you the guidance to let you know whether or not your acceptance rates are within the expectations of others in your group in that particular region. Merchants of record also tend to pay really close attention to those acceptance rates. And so you should expect them to also come to you if they think you're having a problem. That might be a red flag relative to your peer group in that particular region. So I hope that's helpful, Nurs. Again, not a magic number out there,
Yeah.
but it just depends a little bit on what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. Since you covered not only, let's say, mobile apps, but e-commerce in general, I believe there are some apps, like some businesses, like based on subscriptions. The others are, direct purchases. So that differs a lot. Typically in web funnels, we see that for US markets, let's say, or maybe for tier one markets, the first payment acceptance rate is around 80 to 90%. The renewal is a whole different thing. And still, we're going to talk about it later. And for European, maybe some other markets, it's typically lower a little bit if your merchant account is US based and vice versa. We also see some maybe tier three markets where the first payment acceptance rate is even lower. But there's something still to do with that. So let's go further on why payments fail in general. So I think the obvious and the number one reason is insufficient funds. Simply, users, they don't have enough money on their accounts. I think it's pretty all right if your merchant has, if their top reason is insufficient funds, maybe like 50, maybe 60%. Yeah, and for first payments, especially in web funnels, I'm dividing first payments with renewals because, again, the acceptance rate is different. Decline reasons are different. These are, CIT, MIT transaction, they do have their own things to, things to handle, right? And for the first payments, maybe you could fix it with monetization design, right? So maybe some teams in web funnels, they charge $1 paid trial that converts to subscription, right? Yeah, so about the insufficient funds, David, anything to add on your end?
I
How
like
do
your
you handle that?
suggestion and ideas around like the dollar page trial. My experience is that free trials are fantastic, but if the customer has a little bit, a user has a little bit of like skin in the game, they had to put some money down. One, it helps you validate them, which can be helpful as you start to think about, is what you're seeing real users? It gives you a level of validation you don't necessarily get if you're just asking for an email address. Obviously your pricing and packaging plays a role in this. So $1 free trial is fine, but like ultimately you're trying to charge more than $1 for the subscriber. And so if the insufficient funds are being triggered by like a $99 a year package, maybe breaking that up into monthly or quarterly amounts could help with your insufficient funds issue. Of course, then you have per transaction fees typically associated with that. So the downside to breaking it into smaller increments is sometimes that will come with higher fees for you. And then the other thing to keep a really sharp eye on, especially if you're managing your own payments and orchestration versus say outsourcing to like a merchant of record, like I mentioned earlier, is those $1 paid trials can also be used by scammers to help test credit cards because it's a low dollar amount. It's kind of cheap, if you will, to test the credit card. And so fraudsters also have an influence on your acceptance rate. And so obviously we're declining, payment providers in general are declining transactions for good reasons. Like it's a fraudster trying to take advantage of you. And so there's kind of two sides to that coin. Side one is a carding attack where they're testing stolen credit card numbers. So a dollar paid trial can be susceptible to that. So if you're going to go with that strategy, I think it's really great for combating an insufficient fund issue, but you want to make sure you keep a keen eye on that to make sure you're not being taken advantage of. And then the other side of the fraud coin is once you validated that you have a good stolen card, well, then you want to buy it to use some sort of to get some sort of way to turn what you're buying with the stolen card into money or cryptocurrency or whatever it is, so you can convert that into revenue for you as a scammer, if you will. But from the dollar paid trial side, just be really cautious with that, because you could potentially be a victim of a carding attack there. Again, it's really important to choose a payment provider that's going to give you good support and observability there. If you're managing it on your own, just to make sure you keep a keen eye on what's happening with that funnel.
Yeah, good note on the fraud, though. I wonder how FastSpring keeps the merchants in the healthy zone if they see a lot of, fraudulent transactions.
Yeah, carding attacks are a bane of the industry in general, and it's a huge part of what we focus on. We have a combination of artificial intelligence and human optimized rules that help detect this on a platform-wide and individual company basis. This is fairly common approach with payment providers. Again, it's like a core part of what a good payment provider is going to pay attention to. And so one of the key reasons is a provider like FastSpring acts as an orchestrator. So we have multiple payment service providers upstream, local payment methods, alternative payment methods around the world. We bring all of that into one platform. This is very common with other merchants of record as well. And when you have a carding attack that we don't detect and causes a problem for you, it also causes a problem for us. And so one of the benefits of leveraging providers like FastSpring is your success is tied in directly to their success, but also your risk is tied in directly to their risk. So they'll take like I said, a keen eye on helping to make sure that if you are being attacked, they can detect it, they can stop the attack and help prevent future attacks. You'll never be 100% perfect at that. It's kind of this ongoing arms race, if you will, with the bad actors and the risk and fraud management side. But it's helpful, to have a partner that can have your back in that regard. And if you're going it alone, just don't lose sight of this, because it can cause big problems for you later on.
Yeah, it makes sense. I do have a lot of customers asking how do they need to handle taxes, like what should they do once they scale. So it could be pretty important for them. Yeah, let's go further a little bit. So in decline reasons, if you break it down, so insufficient funds is number one, usually. And then you might have something like do not honor. So basically, it might be a soft decline as well. So basically, this is when banks don't trust the transaction. So maybe it could take up to 20, maybe 30% of your decline reasons, depending on the merchant accounts, of course. And so again, basically, banks don't trust your transaction, and there might be several reasons for that. So one of them might be cross-border processing, like cross-border transactions. Let's say when you have a European payment provider, like your legal entity, everything's registered somewhere in Europe, but you run in traffic to US users, which is actually typical setup in Web2App campaigns. What happens is that the US banks see that their US users are being charged with some kind of European bank account, European merchant, and treats it as a cross-border, right? And some newer merchant gets this even more because banks, they don't have any kind of history with your really new some payment processor account, let's say. So tell me, David, how should we handle this? How should we solve this kind of issue?
Cross-border processing is kind of one of those issues that can really help your acceptance rates if you get it done right. And as you think about expanding your business globally, there's multiple things to keep in mind. Everything from like support and localization to currencies you accept taxation, as you mentioned earlier. And so when you have historically expanded your business globally, the way that that worked is you would typically establish an entity in that particular country or region. You would also open a bank account, and then essentially you become a local company. From the payment processing perspective, as you pointed out, if I'm an Australian company selling into the US, if I have an Australian company with an Australian bank selling into the US, then the credit card processors are going to be a little more cautious about accepting those transactions. And so it can lead to a lower acceptance rate. Israeli businesses even have a term for this as they operate with payment service providers in the US. And I forget what it's called, but it's like some kind of two-step thingy they have to do. But really what you're trying to do is to sell as if you were a local entity. Now, the traditional route, again, is to establish a company or entity in the country or region, open an own bank account, do all that kind of stuff. If you don't do that, then you can be susceptible to the lower acceptance rates of the cross-border processing that you pointed out. I know I sound like a broken record on this, but if you leverage a merchant of record like FastSpring or Paddle or 2Checkout or others, they will often have done those bits for you. And so they will have the local entities and the local bank accounts. And so what that means is that even though your company might be located in, anywhere in the world, when you're selling into Brazil, you're selling more like a local entity, which can lead to higher acceptance rates. So if you're going it alone, establish the entities, do the bank account thing, that'll help with those acceptance rates on cross-border processing. If you don't want to mess with all that, you can offload to a merchant of record, and generally they'll have handled all that stuff for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it makes sense. Yeah, so the other reason would be, especially for teams, like for smaller teams building their own checkouts of any kind of payment provider, um, is missing some enough billing data that is being sent to providers. So let's say when you're charging with cards, which is again one of the popular methods everywhere, basically, payment providers, they usually need the context on the payments, like the zip code, like the billing address, the country, email, IP address, sometimes device fingerprints. So so you don't trigger the risk systems, and then the acceptance rate will be all right. So payments won't be declined by any kind of risk system. So keep in mind, usually for smaller teams. Yeah, do you see any kind of, would you say that it is like some kind of hidden decline reason, or not?
I think that in terms of like hidden decline reasons, I don't know about that. I'm sure there are some out there that are like hard to glean. At FastSpring, we have a whole risk and fraud department that helps us balance our approach in terms of who we let through and who we block. Again, the point of these systems is to block bad actors from doing bad things. In this, we have what I often refer to as the balance of suffering and joy. The suffering of adding more fields to my form, like zip code and billing address and so on and so forth, and the joy of having higher acceptance rates if I'm asking for more data. As you pointed out, certain payment methods will request different types of data, and it kind of varies also for different types of products. My wife recently shared that one of her airline accounts had the wrong zip code for years and years and years, and she kept buying flights with it. And I just assumed for a minute they aren't even sharing her zip code when they're running her card. The other thing that's really interesting is if you look at digital wallets or platforms, if you will, like Apple Pay and Google Pay, where they've already collected a lot of this information and all you're asking for is like a double tap and a face scan, then you're kind of reducing a ton of this friction. You do have the IP and then sometimes device fingerprint. These can be helpful signals as well at helping to identify bad actors that are repeating their behavior. Of course, bad actors are also pretty good at taking that data, but obviously if you could identify that there was identifying information from an IP or a device fingerprint that you trusted that user, well, then that might be a reason to like dial down your risk rules and let that person transact more easily. The other thing we see a lot is information about their usage of the app or the product that's being consumed and paid for. And so by sake of example, on mobile gaming, one of the signals that they'll use a lot is how often the player has played the game. So if a player has never played the game and they're spending $200 on a coin pack, well, that's pretty suspicious, right? But if they've played for 40 hours and they're spending $200 on a coin pack, that's less suspicious. Now, in web to app, the users haven't used your app yet, so using those kind of signals aren't necessarily available to you. But if the user has already used your app and they've interacted with it in the right ways, and your payment service provider supports these kind of things, you can use those signals to let those people through. And so you do need to collect information, particularly about people you've never met or engaged with before. But once you've engaged with them, you have a lot more signals that you can take advantage of to understand if it's a transaction you want to let through or not. So I know that was a little bit more than just the billing data side of it, but these are some of the variables that go into making decisions, obviously in an automated way about what transactions to let through or to ban.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, you also mentioned the wallets, which is, I think I should have a couple of slides regarding that. Are they cross-border transactions? Okay, the cards and the wallets. So when it comes to payment methods, yes, usually with Apple Pay and Google Pay, and especially in web funnels, I always tell our customers, put the Apple Pay button right after the plans. It's going to boost your payment conversion rate in the funnels and boost your acceptance rates. Because again, if you're using card checkout, mostly using card checkout, you're going to face a lot of frictions with the 3D Secure. You're going to face frictions on, again, processor needing more info than you deliver. But with Apple Pay, it's a lot better. And I see this difference in the acceptance rate. Usually, again, for the first payments, it might be 80 to 90% with Apple Pay or Google Pay, sometimes with PayPal as well. But with cards, usually 60, maybe up to 80%. Again, a lot of frictions, right? And yeah, so imagine what's going on with these 20% difference, like what kind of revenue you might lose by not getting at your scale at the moment. So I would encourage all the teams with web funnels to check their paywalls. Do you have a Apple Pay button right after the plans, or do you have just a simple checkout with letting users select the payment method? Yeah, so apart from Apple Pay and Google Pay, there are something like local payment methods, especially if you're scaling to not only to US, but also to some other different countries. So you gotta consider local payment methods simply because they convert better. They have higher acceptance rate. So David, could you tell us more about local payment methods? What would be the tips for a Web2App, and how should they engage with that?
Absolutely. So web to app in general, of course, is confined to mobile, and the most efficient way to process a payment, at least in terms of like least taps possible, is going to be with Apple Pay and Google Pay. The user, of course, experiences the funnel once they get to the payment method. If they've selected Apple Pay, then it's just a double tap and a face scan or biometric scan, and then boom, the payment's processed. The acceptance rates are way higher on Apple Pay, Google Pay, than if users are entering cards manually or even with like the pre-fill kind of capabilities within browsers. And so your acceptance rate's higher, it's easier for the user to facilitate it. Overall, it's a win-win-win. So like that would be where I would default if I'm optimizing a web to app funnel. I would start with making Apple or Google Pay based on the device type the default payment method. But from there, I might do a little testing. And you pointed out local payment methods and some of the ones that really stand out that have done a really good job. And these are technically digital wallets, if I understand this correctly. But in Brazil, there's a platform called Pix. It's a government kind of founded and I think operated system, but it's a digital wallet that pretty much everyone in Brazil has. And it's like the most common way that they'll pay for things. There's something similar in India called UPI. These systems are are becoming, if not already, like the default payment method in particular geographies. So now you've got some decisions to think about. Like we know on the device, Apple and Google Pay is likely like the smoothest experience for the user, but for the region, maybe Pix would be a better choice for that particular user. So I like to do a little A/B testing there, see what works best. But for mobile funnels, my preference is to default the payment method to Apple and Google Pay. And then in specific regions, I might test defaulting them to like Pix or UPI instead. Each funnel is different and unique. We talked about, mobile apps that are B2B focused might be better to, stick with Apple and Google Pay. Maybe B2C for certain types might be better to stick with Pix. And so it just depends. But from a least taps possible approach, I tend to favor Apple and Google Pay in mobile funnels.
Makes sense. I think this is my favorite phrase for the whole webinar. I remember the case from I think last week where one of our customers was scaling to India, and they noticed that the first payment acceptance rate was pretty good even with cards, sometimes with Apple Pay, but I think they had 0% acceptance rate with renewals, simply because they don't have the local payment methods. And I think in India, in some banks, you gotta confirm the recurrent transactions. So there are some little things that you gotta know when you're scaling to different countries. So we talked about the first payment acceptance rate as well. And what about renewals, right? Because in Web2App business, the renewals brings the most money because you are charging users every month, sometimes every week, and you need to optimize your acceptance rates on these recurrent transactions. And what would you say about any kind of tips on how to optimize renewals?
Well, it's interesting. I think I think you touched on this a little bit there, but one of the key values of web to app and just generally direct monetization when it comes to subscriptions is the renewal rate. Much, much, much higher renewal rates than what you're going to get through app stores. And you also pointed out quite appropriately that certain regions have different rules about disclosure on renewals and what you're allowed to do and not do. And so as you approach this puzzle globally, it's good to partner with a company that's going to help you figure that out and make sure you and they stay compliant. Now, one of the biggest issues we see at FastSpring when we have renewal issues on rebills or kind of continued billing on a subscription flow is prepaid cards. A lot of products and customers will kind of favor this idea of using a prepaid Visa card or prepaid MasterCard. And then the prepayment just runs out and the subscription ends. Some individuals use this as a method to control subscriptions, so not just let them kind of go on forever. You can generally Visa and MasterCard, as I understand it, don't allow you to like not accept prepaid cards. Like you kind of have to as part of their rule schemes. But you can encourage people to use payment methods that other than Visa and MasterCard that might have a higher renewal rate for you. You can also point out to the user that if they use a prepaid card, they might risk their subscription not successfully renewing, and it might be better to not use a prepaid card for that purpose, like obviously if they highly valued what the app was providing there. When payments fail, you can also try them again later. Maybe the rebill failed for insufficient funds and it's the 31st of the month and the customer is going to get paid like on the 1st of the month. So if you just waited a day, maybe it might have gone through. These are also techniques that you can leverage. Again, there's different rules for different payment methods and regions and what you're allowed to do. But those are some of the techniques that you can use to get around some of the rebill issues of declined transactions.
Well, good note on the prepaid cards, because this is the common issue on renewals as well that we see. And in FunnelFox billing, you can actually block these kind of transactions and show them the message that, okay, we don't accept prepaid cards. Can you please use a different card? And there was a case, I think, that last month when that little action helped our customer to increase the acceptance rate for renewals, because I think around 30% of users are using prepaid cards, like we're using prepaid cards for them. Yeah, interesting take on that.
One other
Yeah.
thing, I would add to that is, you touched on this a little bit, but it's like your biggest lever is to just communicate with the user. One of the great benefits of web to app is establishing a direct relationship with your user, not renting them from app stores like you might do through kind of the app store flow. And that includes being able to, as compliant as staying compliant, but dropping things like retargeting pixels, email marketing, and then of course notifications in the app. I mean, at the end of the day, we all want our subscription renewals to go through and work just fine and all that kind of stuff. But I think we also want that to happen for people that really enjoy using our apps and get value out of it. So as those renewals are coming up, you can pop up reminders in the app. You can send them email notices. If a subscription payment failed, you can pop up the notice in the app. You can send them email notices. You can target them with retargeting ads if you're trying to get them to come back and update their payment information. These are all techniques that you can leverage that are sometimes harder to leverage if you're only taking advantage of App Store monetization. And so if you are leveraging web to app, these are techniques that you can take advantage of that maybe weren't available to you when you were exclusively monetizing through app stores.
Yeah, true. True with the communication as well, because in funnels, there's a little mechanic called routing using based on the decline reason, like if the payment failed. Let's say in FunnelFox, you can route users, so maybe simply show them pop-up if the payment failed due to insufficient funds. Either you can let them, purchase the with more discount, or maybe ask them to use a different card. And then you can also track if there is a do not honor decline reason, or some good technique. It's not really related to declines now, but you can some kind of a recovery strategy as well. When users click the Apple Pay button and then click the X button to close that native Apple Pay UI, you can still fire trigger and then fire a pop-up saying that, okay, there's a discount. This is kind of strategy for mobile apps, but good for Web2App as well. You also mentioned the retry system, and I do have a little slide over there as well. Smart retries for renewals. In FunnelFox billing, in FastSpring, and some other PSPs as well, there is a retry scheme. And basically what it means that if payments failed, you will try again in 3 days, and maybe in 2 days again, etc., based on the length of the subscription. And one good thing here is a partial charge, because if you keep getting insufficient funds for $20, you might want to try and charge $15. Sometimes $10 if it works for you, and then eventually they might recover the subscription, and maybe in the next month they would have sufficient funds on their accounts. Another good strategy here would be building some kind of smart retry system, where you would identify users, bank like bank bins, bank country, and then try to charge them on renewals during the bank working hours, like from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., or maybe try to charge them on Fridays instead of weekends, because usually people have more money on Fridays, right? Yeah, anything to add here, David, maybe on the
Uh,
retries?
Nothing particular. I haven't personally tried the parcel charge retry approach. I'd have to get with our experts to see what we do in regards to that. Just the only thing I would add to that is, as you think of subscription renewals and retries, it's going to vary based on payment method, region, especially around regulations and law. So as you start to experiment there, especially if you're going it on your own. So again, I kind of mentioned how merchants of record do like the payment orchestration, the compliance and all that tax stuff. If you go out and get your own payment service provider relationships and local payment methods, and you do all that yourself, and you're fine tuning these renewal approaches, just make sure you're staying compliant with the payment methods and stay compliant with the locality and the regulations in that particular country or region, because you definitely can get sideways on that. In terms of like turning the dials and doing the right things and trying to get the most out of it, again, if you're offloading to like a merchant of record, typically they'll do a lot of that for you, because again, they're also on the line to make sure that's done right, but your success is their success. So a good merchant of record will go in and help you figure that out and do it in the right way that maximizes your chances for renewals. And so at FastSpring, this is something we work with our clients all the time on. And some clients have no problems at all with renewal rates. They sail right through. Others require more fine tuning to get it really dialed in. And so just make sure to leverage your payment providers for support here, because they're going to come in with a lot of specialized knowledge, not only what you can and can't do, but also what's going to be effective, and measuring and testing that in a way that's going to get the most value for you and your app.
Thank you, David, for that. I think we're gonna share our recording soon as well, because we covered a lot of topics here. But to sum up, the three quick wins are adding local payment methods if you're scaling worldwide, which you do at some point on web funnels, and promote wallets over cards, like just put the Apple Pay button right after the plans. Again, going to boost your conversion rate to purchase, which is good for your overall, let's say, CPAs, or whether you're optimizing on ROAS, on user acquisition, but also helps with acceptance rates. And the retry logic on renewals, do retries, do smart retries, partial charges, and something like micro charges, actually, when we charge $1 instead of whatever it was initially. And then that helps for the long terms, because banks will see that, okay, this merchant is getting some renewals, typically good for, again, a long-term strategy. All right. Thank you, David, for this webinar. It was really helpful, I think. We do have a couple of questions. Let's have, I think, around 10 minutes to that. I see that Braden answered a couple of them, of course. Yeah, just a second.
And start at the top if you want, from Sergey
Yeah, all
there.
right. If you want to cover some.
Yeah, so Sergey here asks, FastSpring and Stripe, what are the differences? So Stripe, as a payment service provider, effectively you are the merchant on that account. FastSpring is what's called a merchant of record. You've heard me mention that a couple of different times. And what that means, and I think Braden answered this in the chat as well, but merchants of record act as a reseller for your product. And so if you see it on your credit card statement, typically what it'll look like is it'll say FS asterisk and then the product name. Well, the benefit to you in that is they are the company that's selling that product in any particular region. So when merchants of record say they'll take care of sales tax for you, they don't mean they're going to file on your behalf or pay on your behalf, or deal with audits on your behalf. You're not even involved. they are the company that's legally responsible for filing, remitting the taxes, and calculating them, and dealing with any audits that come up. You're not even involved with any of that. And so that's one of the key differences for Stripe's PSP offering relative to a provider like FastSpring. And again, there's other providers in the space. You've heard me mention Paddle and others through this conversation. But that's one of the key advantages of a merchant of record. Now, you're actually pretty familiar with merchants of record already if you're monetizing mobile apps, because two of the biggest merchants of record in the entire world are the App Store and Google Play. Marketplaces are merchants of record. They sell your product on your behalf, but they are the entity on the transaction. The difference between a merchant of record provider like FastSpring and a marketplace is the marketplace brings in users and eyeballs. And so they're kind of like this marketing engine that gets your app exposure, where a merchant of record payment provider is really just about helping you facilitate the financial side of it. Now, with web to app, it's really interesting because app stores have users that use the app store and discover your app. And that's part of the value they deliver there. But in web to app, you brought the user to the table, not the app store. And so their 30% or 15% cut, depending on how much revenue you're doing, maybe that's worth it if they brought the user to the table. Maybe it's less worth it if you had to go spend UA budget to bring that user to the table. But that's to kind of familiarize yourself with a merchant of record. It's like a marketplace without the directory, is how you can think about it. So it offloads a lot of those complexities to the service provider.
Yeah, thank you. Hope that makes it clear. And there is also Andrew asked, can you validate prepaid cards on Apple Pay to block them? I'm going to talk about on the behalf of FunnelFox billing. Again, we can orchestrate payments. We can detect card type, which is typically prepaid, debit and credit. And yes, you can block prepaid cards, typically Visa prepaid cards, and then show them message saying that, all right, try using different card, try using different card in your Apple Pay wallet, because again, not all users know that they can actually switch it during the purchase. Yeah, well, David mentioned that this is not really what Visa likes, but still, you can do it. Yeah, any more questions maybe?
I don't think you can validate the cards on Apple Pay because Apple Pay acts as the intermediary. My understanding of the Visa rules is you can't block the prepaid cards, but maybe there's a nuance there I'm not familiar with. But Apple Pay works as that intermediary, so I'm not sure you could actually block card type through Apple Pay. I'd have to ask some others to find out the answer to that. But that's the only extra context I'd add there, Nurs. I think we lost Nurs. This is great. I'm the webinar now as he reconnects. I'll just keep answering questions, I guess, till Nurs reconnects here.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go. There we go. How are you? Glad to see you back here.
Yeah. Yeah, about Nurul is asking about network tokenization. This is also an interesting question, actually. With some orchestrators, you can use network tokens instead of PANs, instead of unencrypted card numbers, which is good with auth rates, usually around 1 to 3%. Usually that's what Visa says, and that's what I see with our customers. But it also helps with fraud, reducing the fraud rates, usually by 10 to 20%. So if you can use network tokens, it could be really helpful with with the card payments. For Apple Pay, there's something like DPAN and MPAN, so you can basically, for renewals, you can pass device fingerprint with Apple Pay. That could be an experiment as well if you want to try that.
Nothing to add there for me.
um,
Looks like Guido, if I'm saying that right, has some questions around pricing. So yeah, it just depends a little bit in the space. So typically there's going to be a percentage and a transaction cost per transaction cost. So your effective rate for a provider like FastSpring is going to vary a little bit based on your average order value. It can also vary a little bit based on the primary regions you're selling in. So a marketplace, depending on if you're talking App Store or Google Play, can be anywhere from 15 to 30%. Merchants of records effective rates can be, like in the maybe 6 to 7% range. Again, it depends on your AOV. It depends on a lot of other factors there, but it's less than a third, way less than a third of typically what you're going to be paying at over $1 million a year in revenue. And about half that. And again, like the profit is great. That part is awesome. But don't forget, direct monetization has much higher renewal rates than App Store subscriptions. Web2App generally is going to have a higher conversion rate in general if you're directing users directly to that Web2App funnel. And you're going to have the ability to have more first-party data for tracking and to support your UA campaigns, your retargeting campaigns, marketing to those users over time. So the profit is great. Like everybody wants to double or triple your profit margin on a per user basis. That part's outstanding, but there's a lot of other like exponentially beneficial aspects to direct monetization and direct subscriptions that you're not going to get if you're exclusively monetizing through app stores. Now that said, I'm not like anti-app store. I think app stores are great. I think they provide a ton of value. I think they need to be a centerpiece of your strategy, but don't miss out on the opportunity of direct monetization and direct subscriptions. It can be a great profit booster, but it can also be a great booster for your renewal rates, your conversion rates, and then your first party data that you can leverage in UA and additional monetization campaigns.
Yeah, thank you for reminding the benefits of the Web2App funnels in general, right? I hope we have a couple of attendees here who are yet to start Web2App. And again, if you're yet to start Web2App, there's FunnelFox to build the payments, build the funnels over there and scale them accordingly. If you're still using some in-house tool as well, willing to scale, maybe run some faster experiments, we could talk about that. Let's go into the last question. Dimitri is asking, any 3DS recommendations depending on country? Yeah, well, typically with orchestrators and with payment providers, you can set something like, let's say you have an orchestrator and then you have some different payment providers. You can use the rules of these payment providers based on whatever rules they might have, and then set something like processor 3DS, and they would decide when to show 3DS window or not. Typically, you will show it in European countries because there are some regulations in there. I don't think it hurts if you show it always for European countries. For US, it might depend with some banks. I think most of the teams, they don't show 3DS for US, but there is some occasional cases where banks might require it. And since you didn't show this 3DS challenge window, the payment would be declined. For that, in our billing system, we have something like adaptive 3DS, where it tries to charge without 3DS window. If it gets to do not honor, or maybe like authentication failed, decline reason, it pop-ups the 3DS challenge. So that could help with the conversion rates, because for some users, they don't see the 3DS. Banks don't require that, and then there are no friction. But for those users who needs to go through 3DS, we will show it to them, and then payment will be captured. Yeah, so I think that will be it for today. If you guys have more questions, you could connect us with LinkedIn. And then we're going to follow up with the recording of the webinar and maybe the slides. Happy to connect with everyone because I do have a list of attendees here. Yeah, and thank you, David from FastSpring. It was a good talk. I hope to have more sessions like this.
Thanks, Nurs. I really appreciate you having me, and it was good to chat with you and answer folks' questions in the chat. Thank you very much.
Yeah, have a good day, everyone.